Aggression as social behavior, definition and measurement. The word aggression derives from the Latin verb aggredi, which means to approach or to go to, and has found its way from Latin into a wide range of different languages. From the early 18th century, the early 1700s onward, this broad and neutral meaning has been narrowed into a more circumscribed definition of attack, with negative connotations of approaching others in an unfriendly, hostile, or harmful way. Beyond this basic definition, the term leaves much room for interpretation. How exactly do we decide if a certain behavior is aggressive or not? What are the different forms in which aggressive behavior appears? Is all aggressive behavior negative? Or is there something like a healthy level of aggression that enables people to stand up for themselves in different domains of life? Aggression, any form of behavior intended to harm or injure another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. When you raise these questions with your friends or colleagues, you will discover great diversity in how people use the term aggression to interpret their own and others' behavior. For instance, is it aggression to spread rumors about an unfriendly colleague, or is this just common workplace behavior? Is it aggression to smack a child that has ignored a parent's command, or is it just part of normal child rearing practices? Is there such a thing as sexual aggression in marriage, or do husbands have the right to overcome their wives' refusal to have sex with them? These examples show that the meaning of aggression is socially constructed, which means it is defined on the basis of a shared understanding in a society in a given historical period. In the course of this book, we will see that physical punishment was considered a legitimate way of disciplining children until fairly recently, and is still seen and practiced as such by parents in many societies across the world. Similarly, questioning a husband's right to force his wife to have sex with him at his convenience and calling such behavior marital rape is a relatively recent development in the Western world and is by no means universally shared around the globe. To set the stage for the research to be presented in this book, it is critical to be clear from the start what exactly psychologists mean when they study aggressive behavior. We need to establish a consensus about the basic criteria for deciding whether or not a given behavior should be classified as aggressive, and to think about ways of categorizing different forms of aggression, to come to grips with the multiple ways in which aggressive behavior may present itself. Once it is clear how the object of study is defined, the next step is to ask how aggression can be measured. It should go without saying that the findings generated by empirical research always need to be interpreted against the background of the methods by which they were obtained. However, in the public debate about aggression, conclusions about causes and consequences of aggression are typically discussed without much attention to their methodological foundations. Therefore, it seems appropriate that a review of the scholarly literature on aggression should start by looking at the definitions and methodological strategies adopted in this field. What is aggression? The term aggression is as firmly established in ordinary language as it is in the vocabulary of social psychologists. Unfortunately, just because people use the same term, they do not necessarily agree about its meaning, and this is clearly true for aggression. For example, when prompted for their definition of aggression, laypersons often mention good or healthy aggression in addition to bad aggression. For social psychologists, as we will see below, there is no positive meaning of aggression. They see aggression as a negative form of social behavior that causes problems between individuals, groups, and societies. Beyond the basic consensus about conceptualizing aggression as a form of negative or antisocial behavior, more precise definitions are needed to specify the criteria by which a behavior is categorized as aggressive. A classic definition was proposed by Buss, 1961, who characterized aggression as a response that delivers noxious stimuli to another organism. However, this purely behaviorist definition is too broad in some ways and too narrow in others. It is too broad because it includes many forms of behavior that should not be categorized as aggression, such as the accidental infliction of harm. At the same time, it is too narrow because it excludes all non-behavioral processes, such as thoughts and feelings, and, most importantly for a behavioral definition, it excludes behaviors that are intended to cause harm but, for whatever reason, fail to achieve their objective. These limitations are addressed in the definition proposed by Barron and Richardson, 1994. They suggested that the term aggression should be used to describe any form of behavior directed toward the goal of harming or injuring another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. This definition is widely accepted, and it is also adopted for the present volume. Broadly speaking, harm denotes any form of treatment that is not wanted by the target persons, such as causing them physical injury, hurting their feelings, damaging their social relationships by spreading rumors about them, or taking away or destroying their cherished possessions. In terms of distinguishing aggression from other forms of social behavior, the definition offered by Barron and Richardson, 1994, has three important implications. Aggressive behavior is characterized by its underlying motivation to harm another living being, not by its consequences, whether or not harm actually occurs. This means that a behavior is regarded as aggressive if it was guided by the intention to harm, even if no actual harm was caused to the target. According to this criterion, a gunshot that misses its target represents an aggressive act, even though not a hair on the target's head may have been harmed. Focusing on the person's intention to harm also allows non-action to be classified as aggressive, such as the deliberate withholding of care or the refusal to help a person in need. Defining aggressive behavior through the intention to harm implies the actor's anticipation that a specific action will produce a harmful outcome. If one person's actions lead to harm or injury of another, but the actor could not have foreseen those adverse effects, the actions do not qualify as aggressive behavior. They may be due to carelessness or incompetence, but are excluded from the definition of aggression. Finally, defining aggression as harmful treatment that the target would want to avoid means that actions which may cause harm but are performed with the target's consent do not represent instances of aggression, such as injury inflicted in the context of sadomasochistic sexual practices. It is important to add that, of course, individuals may act aggressively against themselves up to the point of taking their own life. However, self-inflicted harm does not fall within the above definition, as it does not involve harming another person who is motivated to avoid such treatment. Therefore, self-harm is outside the social psychological perspective on aggression, which focuses on aggression as a form of social behavior between individuals and groups. Aggressive behavior can appear in a great variety of forms. Rather than presenting a long and necessarily incomplete list of specific examples of aggressive behavior, it is useful to look for broader dimensions by which aggressive behavior may be described. Important aspects of a typology for mapping the many faces of aggressive behavior are presented in Table 1.1. As with any typology, some forms of aggression may fit into more than one category. This is true, for example, for relational aggression, which is often treated as a response modality that is distinguished from physical aggression, but it is also seen as a form of indirect aggression because it involves acting against other people behind their back. Furthermore, the different aspects are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, they need to be considered in conjunction to properly understand specific forms of aggression. For example, aggression can be driven by primarily hostile rather than instrumental motives, expressed overtly, in physical terms, and reactively as a response to a preceding provocation. Table 1.1 Aspects of a typology of aggressive behavior. So you have a list of defining aspects on the left and then an example on the right. Response modality can be verbal, shouting or swearing at someone, physical, hitting or shooting someone, postural, making threatening gestures, relational, giving someone the silent treatment. The defining aspect can be its immediacy, can be direct, punching someone in the face, or indirect, spreading rumors about someone behind their back. The defining aspect can be the response quality, like active, making another person engage in unwanted sexual acts, or passive, withholding important information from a colleague at work. It can be defined by its visibility. It can be overt, humiliating someone in front of others, or can be covert, sending threatening anonymous messages to a classmate. The defining aspect can be instigation. It can be proactive, unprovoked, grabbing a toy from another child, or reactive, retaliative, yelling at someone after having been physically attacked. It can be defined by its goal direction, which can be hostile, hitting someone out of anger or frustration, or instrumental, taking a hostage to secure a ransom. It can be defined by the type of harm, physical, broken bones, or psychological, emotional, undermining self-esteem or sense of safety. It can be defined by the duration of effects, transient, minor bruises, or lasting, long-term inability to form relationships, and it can be defined by the social units involved, individuals, intimate partner violence, or groups and societies, riots and wars. Relational aggression, behavior intended to harm the target person through damaging their social relationships. Physical aggression, behavior intended to cause physical harm to another person. Indirect aggression, aggression delivered behind the target person's back by damaging their social relationships, for example, through spreading rumors. Direct aggression, aggressive behavior directed immediately at the target, such as hitting or shouting abuse. Although most of the aspects in Table 1.1 are self-explanatory, some of them require further comment. One such aspect is the distinction between direct and indirect aggression. Direct aggression involves a face-to-face confrontation between the aggressor and the target, whereas indirect aggression is aimed at harming other people behind their back by spreading rumors about them or otherwise damaging their peer relationships. The term relational aggression is also used by some authors instead of indirect aggression to denote aggression aimed at harming the target person's social relationships. Because indirect relational aggression can be inflicted covertly without the target being aware of the aggressor's identity, it represents an alternative strategy for harming another person when the costs of engaging indirect forms of aggression would be high. See also Chapter 4 for a detailed discussion of direct and indirect aggression in the context of gender differences. The distinction between hostile and instrumental aggression refers to the psychological function of the aggressive behavior for the actor. The primary motive for aggressive behavior may be either the desire to harm another person as an expression of negative feelings, as in hostile aggression, or the aim of achieving an intended goal by means of the aggressive act, as in instrumental aggression. The two types of motivation for aggressive behavior frequently coexist. Nevertheless, we shall see when discussing theories of aggressive behavior that it makes sense to look at them separately because different psychological processes may be involved. However, for a critical analysis of the instrumental-hostile distinction, see Bushman and Anderson, 2001. Hostile aggression, aggressive behavior motivated by the desire to express anger and hostile feelings. Instrumental aggression, aggressive behavior performed to reach a particular goal as a means to an end. An additional feature to be considered when defining aggression refers to the normative appraisal of the behavior in question. Is aggression always to be condemned, or are some forms of aggression accepted by social consensus? Whether or not the aspect of norm violation should be included among the defining features of aggression is controversial, which is why it is not listed in Table 1.1. Disciplinary measures used by parents and acts of physical self-defense are examples of behaviors that satisfy the criteria of intention, anticipation, and the target's desire to avoid them. Accordingly, they should be classified as aggressive, yet they are covered by social norms that make them acceptable. Therefore, some authors have argued that behavior should only be considered aggressive if it involves the violation of a social norm. However, as Berkowitz, 1993, has pointed out, defining aggression in terms of norm violation or socially unacceptable behavior is problematic, as the normative evaluation of a behavior often differs depending on the perspectives of the parties involved. For example, some people and cultures regard corporal punishment as an acceptable and effective child-rearing practice, while others consider it to be an unacceptable form of aggression. A similar point can be made with regard to the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate aggression. Capital punishment, for example, satisfies all elements in the definition by Barron and Richardson, 1994. Actions are carried out with the intention and anticipation of inflicting harm on the convicted person, who is motivated to avoid such treatment. However, these actions are legitimized in the laws of many countries. Is it therefore appropriate to regard them as aggression, provided that the legal procedures are properly conducted? Although many people will reject this idea, others may have a different view. In the absence of explicit legal regulations, the question of legitimacy becomes even more difficult. Are violent acts committed by separatist movements or oppressed minorities legitimate or illegitimate forms of aggression? It is obvious that the answer to this question will depend to a large extent on the position a person takes in the underlying controversy, as poignantly captured, for example, in the phrase, "One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter." Therefore, although issues of norm violation and legitimacy are highly relevant, for example, when analyzing dynamics of intergroup conflicts or justifications for aggressive behavior, they are problematic to accommodate as critical features in a basic definition of aggression. Before turning from the definition to the measurement of aggressive behavior, we should briefly look at the meanings of three related terms, namely antisocial behavior, coercion, and violence. Antisocial behavior denotes behavior that violates social norms of appropriate conduct. It is a broader construct than aggression, in that it includes behaviors that are not intended to harm other people, such as vandalism or lying. Coercion is defined by Tedeschi and Felsen as an action taken with the intention of imposing harm on another person or forcing compliance. Defined in this way, coercion can be seen as a form of instrumental aggression. Coercive action can take the form of threats, punishments, or bodily force, and it is directed as much at gaining compliance as at causing harm. Coercion is seen as a form of social influence, which highlights the social nature of this type of behavior and brings it conceptually closer to processes of communication and interaction not previously examined in the context of aggression. In contrast to antisocial behavior and coercion, which are broader constructs than aggression, the term violence is more narrow in meaning and is restricted to behaviors carried out with the intention to cause serious harm that involve the use or threat of physical force, such as hitting someone over the head or, in the ultimate form, taking another person's life. Thus, not all instances of aggression involve violence. For example, shouting at someone would be described as aggressive, but not violent, but all acts of violence qualify as aggression. Violence is defined by social psychologists as the infliction of intense force upon persons or property for the purposes of destruction, punishment, or control, or as physically damaging assaults which are not socially legitimized in any way. These definitions by psychologists are in line with the definition proposed by the World Health Organization. It describes violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. Antisocial behavior, behavior that violates social norms about appropriate conduct. Violence, behaviors carried out with the intention to cause serious harm that involve the use or threat of physical force. A functional typology of violence has been presented by Matani, McGowan, and Williams, 1996, who identified 6 potential functions of violent behavior: change of or escape from aversive situations, positive reinforcement, for example, attainment of a particular goal, release of negative affective arousal, resolution of conflict, gaining of respect, and attack on a culturally defined enemy, for example, a member of a devalued outgroup. A special form of violence has been termed structural violence and denotes societal conditions that entail harmful consequences for certain social groups. Structural violence is seen as a feature of social systems that leads to social inequality and injustice, for example, by institutionalizing a power hierarchy between men and women, which leaves women largely unprotected against male sexual coercion. In the present analysis, the focus will be on violence between individuals and social groups, but issues of structural violence will also be touched upon in several places in the course of our discussion. How to measure aggression. Measuring aggressive behavior according to the standards of systematic empirical research poses particular challenges for researchers due to its potentially harmful nature. When studying prosocial behavior, for example, researchers can create experimental situations in which research participants may give help to others. By contrast, designing experiments in which research participants may inflict harm on another person, become targets of other participants' aggressive behavior, or are exposed to treatments expected to increase the likelihood that they will show aggressive behavior is problematic from an ethical point of view. With regard to studying aggression in real life outside the laboratory, other problems arise. With the exception of unusual circumstances, such as war or civil unrest, acts of severe aggression are relatively rare in everyday life, which makes them hard to measure in natural contexts. Therefore, the methodological toolbox available to aggression researchers is quite limited, and they often have to resort to artificial contexts to reconcile experimental rigor and ethical feasibility. Table 1.2 presents an overview of the different methods used by social psychologists to study aggressive behavior, as well as aggressive thoughts and feelings. Existing measures of aggression may be broadly classified into 2 categories: measures relying on direct observation, and measures relying on reports of aggressive behaviors that the researchers have not been able to observe directly. Observational methods enable researchers to gain first-hand evidence of aggressive behavior in a given situation, either in the laboratory or in the field. Measures based on reporting provide them with second-hand accounts of aggressive behavior that can cover longer periods of time and a wider spectrum of situations. The approaches in each group have both strengths and limitations, as will become evident in the following discussion. Observing aggressive behavior in natural contexts. Observing aggression in the field, i.e., under natural conditions, is a good strategy because information can be collected in an unobtrusive way without people realizing that their behavior is being observed and recorded. With a behavior such as aggression that everybody knows to be socially undesirable, this is a particular advantage because it avoids the problem of measurement reactivity, i.e., people's tendency to change their usual patterns of behavior because they are aware that they are under observation. At the same time, the fact that people are not made aware that they are being observed and therefore have no chance to opt out poses particularly strict ethical constraints on this type of method. Observational measures in natural contexts mainly come in 2 forms: naturalistic observation, in which the researcher records behavior as it unfolds naturally without manipulating the situation in any way, and field experiments that involve a systematic yet unobtrusive manipulation of certain variables to observe the effects of that manipulation on the likelihood of aggressive behavior. Table 1.2 Summary of Methods for Studying Aggression. Observing Behavior in Natural Contexts. Naturalistic Observation. Field Experiments. Observing Behavior in the Laboratory. Teacher-Learner Paradigm. Essay Evaluation Paradigm. Competitive Reaction Time Task. Hot Sauce Paradigm. Tangram Help Hurt Task. Collecting reports of aggressive behavior, thoughts, and feelings. Self-reports of aggressive behavior. Parent or teacher reports. Peer nominations. Measures of anger and hostility. Implicit association test. Projective techniques. Using official records. Crime statistics. Archival data. Naturalistic observation. Recording the natural occurrence of aggressive behavior in everyday situations. Field experiment. Manipulating conditions in everyday situations to observe the effects of the manipulation on the likelihood of aggressive behavior. Naturalistic observation. One aim of observation in natural contexts is to obtain a picture of the various forms of aggression in a particular setting and the frequency with which they occur. It is a suitable method in settings in which the spontaneous occurrence of aggressive behavior is sufficiently high to generate enough counts of behavior per time unit of observation, such as on a school playground during break time. For example, Graham and Wells, 2001, conducted an observational study in 12 bars in Ontario, Canada, to record the frequency of aggressive incidents among young adults. Aggressive incidents were defined as involving personal violation, verbal insults, unwanted physical contact, behavior that was offensive according to the norms of the place, or a dispute in which the participants had personal investment. Trained observers were positioned in different parts of the bar and recorded each aggressive incident. They observed, for example, that 77.8% of the incidents involved men only, 3.4% of them involved women only, and the remaining incidents involved both men and women. In a third of all incidents, severe physical aggression, for example, kicking, punching, brawling, occurred. Naturalistic observation is particularly useful in studies with young children who are not yet able to provide self-report data or participate in structured laboratory experiments. In a study by Ostrov and Keating, 2004, trained observers watched preschool children during a free play situation and recorded their behavior as physical aggression, for example, hitting, pushing, punching, verbal aggression, for example, antagonistic teasing, calling mean names, or relational aggression, for example, excluding from playgroup, ignoring a peer. Frequency counts of behaviors in each category were summed up to yield physical, verbal, and relational aggressiveness scores for each child. In this type of research, the natural flow of behavior is first recorded, then broken down into more fine-grained units of analysis, and finally assigned to the predefined categories. Questions of when and where to sample behavior and how to define the basic units of analysis are central to this methodological approach. Moreover, it is important to check how reliably the units can be assigned to the different categories by examining the correspondence achieved by independent coders. As noted in the comprehensive review by Lamp et al., 2017, existing observational studies demonstrate the feasibility of coding natural occurrences of different forms of aggressive behavior with sufficient agreement between coders. Verbal aggression. Use of verbal means, such as insults, to cause harm to another person.